Good morning, all you fine people. Welcome to The Sweat. I'm your host, Jessie Coffield, and we've got lots to get to today, hitting PGA, hockey, some NFL sprinkled in there. But let's kick things off in the association. Today's panel is a baller duo, DraftKings contributor Gary Thorne and RotoWire's Nick Whalen. Guys, we're getting the party started with NBA building blocks. So who are you building your lineup around at these positions on tonight's six-game NBA slate? So let's start with building block at center. Who are you going with, Garion?
I really think you just have to look at Hassan Whiteside. I know his price point has skyrocketed the past couple of weeks, rightfully so. He's been one of the most consistent fantasy assets we've had in basketball in that span of time. He scored 40 or more DraftKings points in 14 of his last 16 games. He really has just been incredibly consistent, even considering he's not getting the full allotment of minutes that a lot of centers who put up these numbers tend to need. I mean, his per 36 numbers are off the charts. So if he ever just lucks his way into like 35 minutes, he's going to drop 80 DraftKings points apparently. But I think the big thing to think about with Whiteside tonight is matchup. We kind of talked about this a little bit last week, but the Raptors continue to roll along without a lot of front court pieces. And the pieces they have to use, while useful, are undersized. Serge Ibaka is a power forward at 6'9". Chris Boucher is the backup center who is maybe 175 pounds soaking wet. You just look at someone like Whiteside who has 4 20-plus rebound games in his last 10 starts. He should be able to dominate the glass against an undermanned and undersized Raptors team. So I just think his floor is massive tonight.
Well, Garion has me convinced. Who are you going with, Nick?
Yeah, I had Whiteside as my initial pick, and I actually ended up pivoting to DeAndre Ayton, who's been back in the lineup now for 4 games from his most recent injury absence. He's got 3 double-doubles in each of his last 3. He only played 20 minutes in his first game back, so you can kind of throw that one out. But I like what I've seen from him. I think, this whole season, kind of the narrative with Phoenix when they got off to that hot start was, maybe they're better without DeAndre Ayton. They're functioning as more of a team, not having to dump it down to him. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Obviously, they haven't been able to sustain that early season success, but I mean, he's basically been a 15 and 12 guy whenever he's on the floor and playing his normal allotment of minutes. He's handed out 9 assists over his last 2 games. He's blocked at least 1 shot in each of his last 3. And you talk about the matchup tonight against Sacramento. Rashawn Holmes left the Kings game last night. We don't know necessarily what his status is tonight. They were without Bogdan Bogdanovic last night. I mean, they're a team right now that's just really, really banged up. Marvin Bagley, of course, is on the shelf as well. So I like the matchup, for Whiteside. Everything Gary said is pretty much spot on, but I'll pivot to Ayton at the center spot.
All right, let's move to forward. Who are you building around at forward, Nick?
He's eligible at forward, maybe more of a center, but I'm going to go Anthony Davis and pay up for him at 10,100 against the New York Knicks. And I think what maybe scares me off a little bit is that matchup. But this is a Lakers team that, while the record, is really gaudy, they haven't had a ton of just absolute thorough, first quarter to fourth quarter dominating games. Even against Phoenix the other night, I mean, they put up 40 plus in the first quarter. We're up almost 30 in the first half of that game. And all of a sudden, it's a 6-point game in the fourth quarter. So, the Knicks are a considerably worse opponent even than the Suns. So I think this is probably a pretty easy win for the Lakers, but I don't see it as a game where, they're up 25 plus in the second half and we only see Davis play something like 25 minutes.
All right, Gary, and who are you going with at forward?
I mean, it's always tough putting Andrew Wiggins in a lineup. You never exactly know what version of Wiggins you're going to get, whether it's going to be the sort of efficient version or just regular Wiggins where he needs 25 shots to make 10 field goals. But Minnesota continues to just be a place where you can try and mine value. Obviously, we're going to have to wait it out and see who's actually active tonight. They are starting to get back some of their key pieces. But I think it's crucial to note that Wiggins' salary is $6,900 tonight. It's the first time he's been below $7K since November 11th. He's just got too much of an upside on a team that needs him to be the primary scoring option if Karl-Anthony Towns isn't active. I mean, he came back in that game against Cleveland. It was clearly rusty, but still had a 30% usage rate. And then the matchup. It's just really a fantastic matchup against Memphis. Over the last 10 games, the Grizzlies have the 3rd worst defensive rating in basketball and the 4th highest pace. That's perfect when you talk about matchups. So I think in what should be an up-tempo game, if Karl Anthony Towns is still out tonight, which I think would be his 10th straight game now, Wiggins is just far too cheap at the forward spot.
All right, Gary, and let's move to guard. Who are you building around?
Well, Nick mentioned earlier just how depleted the Kings are, and it's really key pieces to the Kings, without even talking about Rashawn Holmes and what his status for tonight is going to be. If they don't have Bogdanovich and if they don't have Bagley, that's 2 of their 4 highest usage pieces who won't be on the court tonight. And I just think De'Aaron Fox is going to benefit. He's not necessarily one of the highest ceiling pieces. He's really only had a couple games this season where he's exploded, but I do think he's an incredibly high floor piece at below $8,000 at the guard spot. Phoenix is another fantastic matchup, a combination of a bad defensive team and a very high-paced team. They have the 2nd worst defensive rating in basketball across the last 10 games. They are 10th in pace across that span, and that's equated out to them surrendering the most points of any team in the league over the last 10 games. So I think in a situation where his usage should be a little bit higher, just considering the offensive firepower that the Kings will be down, I think Fox is in a really nice spot.
All right, Nick, who do you think is in a nice spot at guard?
I'm going to go with SGA. He's at 6,800 tonight. Gets a really good matchup against the Nets team that's top 10 in the league in pace. They've kind of drifted back toward the middle of the NBA in terms of their defensive rating, and their team too, like Sacramento, that's nursing a ton of key injuries. But SGA is somebody that I typically have shied away from for the most part this season. I mean, he's kind of shifted and become a little bit more of a score-first guy this year, playing more off the ball alongside Chris Paul. And seeing those assist numbers, I think, throughout the year has kind of scared me off a bit. But look at him over his last 10 games, and even though he's still at 2.3 assists per game, nothing to write home about there, 6.3 rebounds per game. He's got 9, 7, 7, 10, 7. Those are his rebound numbers over the last 5 games individually. He's averaging almost 2 steals per game over his last 10. He's a guy that on certain nights can get you a block or 2, which is huge, obviously, from the guard spot. And then scoring-wise, just under 25 points per game over his last 10. And again, I like the matchup a lot against Brooklyn tonight. And I think 6,800 is a really good price for a guy who has routinely been up close to 50 DraftKings points over the last couple of weeks.
All right, how about some value, Nick?
There's a few guys I'll throw out. As usual, you're kind of targeting the injuries. And I think the Kings are first and foremost tonight. Marvin Bagley's missed 6 straight games, so I would say the chances of him playing probably aren't great. Rashawn Holmes seems to have at least dodged a major injury last night, but kind of a lot to ask him to come back and play on the second night of a back-to-back. So someone like Harry Giles, who saw increased minutes last night, Nemanja Bjelica, even Trevor Ariza, who was kind of the main beneficiary in Monday's game. Those guys are all options. Gorgie Jang for Minnesota, if and when Karl Towns is ruled out again, is always a consideration. But he's to the point now where I think he's at 6,800, not really much of a value play. Then in Toronto, I think Terrence Davis, a guy who had some big games early on, he's a name to keep an eye on with Fred VanVleet out tonight.
All right, Gary, and building block at value.
Yeah, to back up Nick's point, I think there's a couple guys in the Raptors you can look at. Terrence Davis at 4.9, although he's a little bit more expensive than I thought he might be. Even Matt Thomas at the minimum. He's coming back from a lengthy absence, but the Raptors don't have any shooters. And as the Heat proved a couple nights ago, you can zone them for 40 minutes. So Matt Thomas might get 20 to 25 minutes at the min. But one guy I do really like, who's a little bit higher priced than Thomas, $4,600, Sekou Doumbouya. Coming off his worst start of his career. He hasn't had many starts. But he, against the Lakers, was starting at small forward. The Pistons wanted to match him up against LeBron James. Not surprisingly, the rookie 19-year-old fouled out of that game. Still logged 34 minutes, though, and it seems like he's locked into about 30 minutes a night. And if he's starting again at power forward tonight, which he should be against Cleveland, he just seems like he's a walking double-double. And his price point went down $400. Cleveland's second worst defensive rating in the NBA. It's a really, really good matchup, and it seems like the pricing gods have penalized the rookie for a really tough matchup against the Lakers. So that's a spot where you should probably take advantage.
All right, good stuff, guys. Gonna talk golf when the sweat returns.
Hey there, I'm Brendan Glasheen, and with this DraftKings update, Tua Tagovailoa has announced he is foregoing his senior season at Alabama and is declaring for the 2020 NFL Draft. Tua made the announcement at a press conference with his head coach, Nick Saban. Tua said the decision pretty much boils down to one thing, and he said, I think that's faith. Faith in his health. He had surgery on his hip almost 2 months ago. Tua says he's optimistic that he'll be able to play this upcoming season. Admitted, though, he's worried about what he can do right now. So teams in the market for a quarterback this coming April in the draft, you look towards the top, Bengals, Dolphins, those are the obvious picks. You'd think, though, those franchises have their eyes set on more sure things like LSU's Joe Burrow, Oregon's Justin Herbert. Remember, Tua has the third best odds over on the DraftKings Sportsbook to be taken first overall. That's at plus 1,600. As you file down the list of teams in the draft order, you can make a case for a bunch of teams. Jaguars at 9, Colts at 13, the Bucs at 14. How about two teams we just found out about in their draft order, 23 and 24? Patriots and Saints, respectively. Two 40-year-old quarterbacks pending free agents. The rest of the order is TBA based on how the rest of the postseason shakes out. Health is the number one key to pinpoint when Tua gets selected.
The Sony Open starts on Thursday in Honolulu. I wish I was going there, but we have the second best thing, which is a local. No, wrong.
No way.
Not him.
There we go.
There he
this
is.
Guy.
That's one half of our PGA panel. It's our favorite Hawaiian. That'd be Reed Fowler. And of course, as you saw, we have Jeff Ulrich, who is not a Hawaiian native. So Reed, what can you tell us?
Jeff is clearly not. I think he's the antithesis of a native Hawaiian. No, I'm just kidding. Look, Sony Open is always a nice place to look when us here in New England, and especially where Jeff is when you watch it on TV. It's you kind of living vicariously through those guys. It sits at the bottom of the Palolo Valley. It's right on the probably steps away from the Pacific Ocean, more specifically Kahala Beach Park. It's a beautiful course. It's a flat course. It's not going to be affected too much by wind, even though the forecast is going to be quite windy throughout the week, and some rain and precipitation on Saturday and Sunday. But this is where we really see the calendar year start off. Yes, Kapalua was fun, but Sony Open is a first full field event. It's going to be really exciting. A lot of top guys there, too, like Patrick Reed, Justin Thomas, guys that we'll get into in a little bit.
All right, yeah, let's just get into it. PGA high or low. So are these golfers starting odds to win this weekend's Sony Open too high or too low? We start with Justin Thomas, the guy with the best odds, plus 450. Reed, too high or too low?
I can't get lower than this. I mean, plus 450, we've seen, like we talked about a lot, right? Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, these other guys in these spots, in these tournaments at plus 600, plus 650. This is extremely low. I'm going to stay away. But look, Justin Thomas, one of the only guys in the past few years to win Kapalua and then win it up against the Sony Open. And we've seen 7 of the past 8 winners at the Sony Open play the week previous. And so when you're looking at some of these guys, again, that we'll talk about in a little bit, you like where they're at. Not necessarily because they've played the Sony Open. You don't need a lot of course experience at Waialae Country Club. What you do need, though, is how to play these winds, when they shift, when those Kona winds come, when they don't, when the trade winds come through, and then the Bermuda putting. That's really where you want to focus on. Look, he's number 4 in the world ranking, and he could get closer to number 1 if he keeps on playing like he has been. But there's other guys, specifically in this price range. If you look at Webb Simpson, he's someone that I really like. That's really near here. But Justin Thomas, plus 450, I'm going to stay away, even though he's got a good chance.
Jeff, do you want to stay away?
Yeah, I mean, shout out to our producer, Tom, who got me there. He must have gotten up pretty early in the morning because you got to do that to pull one over my eyes, you know what I'm saying? But, yeah, I pretty much agree with what Reed is saying. Look, Justin Thomas deserved to be a pretty big favorite last week, but we're in a full field event here, and it's not even that it's back-to-back weeks that I'm worried about Justin Thomas winning. He clearly can do that. It's just, you know, you're throwing in like 100 other golfers here who are all coming in. All it takes is one hot putting week from one of these players at like 50 to 1, and your plus 450 bet on Justin Thomas isn't going to look so hot. So, you know, he had to go overtime to beat Patrick Reed. It's a little concerning too, the way he closed out that tournament. Not the greatest Justin Thomas fashion. I'm completely fine fading this. I mean, you're going to get better shots to take on Justin Value as like a favorite, you know, where he's 8 to 1 or 9 to 1. This isn't really it. I just feel like, again, it's actually a pretty quality sort of top 20% of the field here. I think there's definitely guys in the 50 to 1 range who are very live and can take down some of the elite players. So I agree. I think this is just, it's too low for me.
All right, what about Patrick Reed plus 1,200? Jeff, too high or too low for you?
It's the same story. I mean, Patrick Reed at 12-1 is kind of rarely going to be a good bet, and it's nothing against Patrick Reed. He's a very quality player. It's just he's hot and cold. He's not somebody who just ranks in the top 10 of strokes gained tee to green every week throughout the course of the season. You'll see his ball striking come and go, and even last week his ball striking wasn't good. He gained over 9 strokes on the green. I mean, are you going to trust him to have like 45 one putts again this week? I don't, and especially not at 12-1. I don't want to take that chance. So Patrick Reed, a guy who tends to get a win every season, but I know he looked good last week. Again, it's just if he was 25-1, I'd be a lot more bullish on that. But at 12-1, this is a pretty easy stay away for me for Reed.
Reed, is it an easy stay away for you?
No, I actually really like it. I mean, clearly at plus 1,500 would have been more for me personally, that I would have been on it even more, but at plus 1,200, and you're going to hear that a lot with Patrick Reed, right? That he gained not only 9.3 strokes putting, but he also gained 3 through his short game, so around the green. So his short game, he gained almost 12 strokes or more than 12 strokes around the greens. And really, when you look at just golf in general, if you're having to gain that many strokes, that means that something is off, right? And that was his approach. He lost a stroke and a half. But if you look at since 2013, where he's lost 2.5 strokes through approach, 1.5, whatever it may be, he's gained an average of almost 6.5 strokes putting. And what that tells me is that when he knows that something is off, and he actually spoke to this in his post conference there, or his post presser, that what he's figured out now, that on the course he's making these adjustments where if that draw isn't working for him, then he's going to play that fade. If he's trying to draw it and he's actually hitting the ball left to right for him, for a right-handed golfer, he's making those in-round adjustments, and we've seen that time and time again. Look, he's over the last 10 tournaments where he's lost strokes, or where he's still gaining about a stroke and a half on average through approach, he hasn't finished worse than 22nd. So he has these tournaments where he does finish bad with his irons, but he's still making it up with his putting. I like him, especially when you look at, again, the history in terms of how well these guys do at Kapalua, and put it to Waialae with a runner-up finish. I think he's a fantastic play at this number.
All right, Reed, what about Hideki Matsuyama at plus 1,600?
Yeah, this one's tough. This one's tough for me. His course history, more for DraftKings. I'd play him on DraftKings as a GPP play, just because his history over his last 3 tournaments here is his best finishes at T27. He's kind of this guy who needs to get a couple of tournaments under his belt. We haven't seen him since President's Cup. So I'm going to fade him for me at this number. I'm much more on DraftKings as opposed to just a straight-up bet.
Jeff, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I don't like this number on Hideki at all. Like, I would actually rather bet Reed again than Matsuyama this week. And I guess, like, the course setup really isn't that bad. I mean, it's pretty big emphasis on approaches. But, I mean, the Hideki just is not a good Bermuda putter. And even if your irons are good at this course, I mean, you still have to sink be top 10 in putting for the week. And Hideki just does not do that very much. He certainly doesn't do it on Bermuda very much. If you're looking at this range, I would much prefer going down to Sung J M, who did also play in the President's Cup. He's T16 at this event last year. That T16 is actually better than anything Matsuyama's ever put up at this event. So M is a much better putter than Matsuyama, quite frankly, just overall, even though he's a young player. He's proven he's a better putter than Matsuyama already, in my opinion. So I don't really like Hideki at this number. I think this number's too low. I do like him if you can get him above plus 2,000.
All right, Matt Kuchar at plus 1,800. Jeff, he's one of your horses for courses in your article for the playbook. So what do you think about this guy?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not like I don't really go out of my way to bet Matt Kuchar at this number, but it's pretty tough to argue that this number should be any higher for him. I mean, his record at this event is pretty ridiculous, quite frankly. I mean, he's T8 or better in 5 of the last 6 times he's shown up, and the only time he didn't finish top 8 or better, he was T13. It's just a perfect setup for Matt Kuchar. It's a simple course where if you just put your ball in the fairway, your irons and putter are going to do the rest. And if you have an okay short game as well, that's Matt Kuchar's game, just being consistent, not getting in trouble off the tee. And there's not much trouble to get in off the tee here. So you can understand why Kuchar does so well at this event. It's a classic test. It sets up well for a veteran player who just can hammer his irons, repeat, sink enough putts and get it done. Like I said, I think this number is pretty much perfect. It's not something I'm going out of my way to bet. I'd probably rather maybe just take a shot with the player a little bit higher this week. But this number is pretty much right. Obviously, you can get it a little bit better. That's good. But I think these odds are pretty fair for Kuchar.
Do you think they're pretty fair read?
Yeah, he's top 5 in strokes gained total since 2015, and in that span, in 2 years, he didn't play here, and so when he's here, he gains a ton of strokes. Last year, he gained 13 strokes gained total, which is fantastic. And Jeff hit the nail on the head there. When you look at this course, it's set up for guys like himself, Webb Simpson, Zach Johnson, these shorter hitters. That it's a really get the ball in the fairway, and it's a second shot course. Even if you miss the fairway, you're not going to be penalized too much in the rough because it's not that thick. And really where it comes down to is Bermuda putting, and he's one of the best. So this number, yes, plus 1,800 is fine. Jeff mentioned Sanjay M. I really like that bet. I think it's plus 2,600 on DK Sportsbook right now. That's where you got to go. Par 4 scoring, strokes gained through approach, all of that stuff works in Sanjay's favor, and you're getting them at a more favorable price.
All right, Joaquin Niemann plus 2,500. Read too high or too low for you?
This one's a little too low for me. He performed fantastic. He already has a win under his belt in the swing season at the Greenbrier. But this one, I get it. This is more, we saw him perform extremely well in the first couple rounds in Kapalua. And this course, again, sets up nicely for him in terms of what you want out of a golfer. But at plus 2,500, again, there's other guys, Morikawa's in that spot, who sets up nicely in here. Sanjay M, who we just talked about, sets up a little bit nicer. Again, more DraftKings for me than a straight outright bet, just because there's other guys in that price range that I like better.
Jeff, how do you feel about Niemann?
I think these odds are pretty fair as well. Obviously, you'd probably like it, closer to plus 3,000. But I think these are very fair odds. I mean, Niemann's definitely a guy I'm looking at. I mean, 8th in par 4 scoring last year. His only win came on another par 70, like a classic course at the Greenbrier. I think this is a very, very good setup for Joaquin Niemann. The only question with Niemann, and it's a little bit of a similar story to Matsuyama, is can he sink enough putts this week to get it done? And it is a question. He's been a streaky putter. I think he is a better putter than Matsuyama, but he's a young player again. He hasn't really found that consistency with the flat stick that some of these more veteran players have. So it's a bit of a concern, but at the same time, I mean, he's quite a bit higher in odds than Matsuyama. So, we're talking about the two, especially in a comparison. I would much prefer going with Niemann this week over Matsuyama. Also has the advantage of playing last week, which, if you follow me on Twitter, it's a pretty big trend at the winners of this course. Obviously, trends, they're very sketchy. That trend could easily break like a couple years in a row, and it wouldn't be that big a deal. But, it is something to consider. I mean, these guys who had the opportunity to play last week obviously have a pretty good event under their belt. So I like Niemann at these odds. I think these are pretty fair too.
All right, thanks, guys. Jeff, sit tight. Gonna need you for hockey next.
Hey, I'm Brendan Glasheen, and with your DraftKings Fantasy Flash. For the first time in his 20-year career, quarterback Tom Brady is set to become an unrestricted free agent on March 17th when his current contract voids. Immediately after the wild card loss to the Titans, Brady said retirement is pretty unlikely. He affirmed his knee-jerk reaction with NBC Sports' Peter King. Brady on his pending free agency, quote, "I'll explore those opportunities whenever they are. If it's the Patriots, great. If that doesn't work, I don't know. I just don't know," end quote. Patriots owner Robert Kraft fully supports the 42-year-old Brady to have some freedom. Kraft also spoke to King. Here's the quote. "Before the season started, it was very important to Tom that he be free to do whatever he wanted at the end of the year. You know what I said to myself? That any person who plays 20 years for this team and helps us get to 6 Super Bowls and has been really selfless, he's earned that right." The man in the middle of all of this is the head coach, Bill Belichick, who recently declined any future questions about the football team. The next time we hear from any of these New England franchise staples, at least when we have to hear from them, NFL owners' meetings in late March. Brady's future may already be determined.
Time for some good old-fashioned hockey talk. Here to hit the ice with me is DraftKings contributor Jeff Ulrich and Awesemo.com's Chris Wassel. So now we play our favorite game, NHL opening face-off, choosing between top options at these positions for tonight's 12-game NHL slate. So at center, McKinnon and Bergeron are the only two centers over 8K tonight. Just below them, you could roll with Evgeny Malkin at 7,500 at Vegas, or Detroit's Dylan Larkin at 7,100 versus Montreal. Jeff, would you consider using one of those guys over the top two options?
I don't think so, to be honest. McKinnon is just in such a good spot against the Rangers, who just allow a crap load of shots on net every night, to be quite frank. I mean, the second most shots against per game in the league. McKinnon, obviously, and he's coming off a 7-shot on goal night. He leads the league in shots on goal. Just an absolute monster producer. I just feel like it's a little bit of a too good of a spot not to consider paying up for one of these guys. And Bergeron, quite frankly, is in a good spot against Nashville too. I like Larkin. I like the matchup, but like 7,100, I just don't think you ever have to pay that much for a Detroit offensive player, considering how bad their power play is. Not really a great matchup for Malkin. I think you just pay up for McKinnon here.
Chris, do you agree with Jeff? You kind of just got to pay up for the top guys?
At this point, you have to. Because, look, yeah, Montreal gives up the 4th most DFS points to centers out there in the league. But, again, Dylan Larkin's been so bad along with the rest of the Detroit offense all season. Their power play is bottom 5. Their penalty kill is among the worst not named Winnipeg in league history. And when you look at, say a guy like even Evgeny Malkin, a bad matchup tonight, definitely for him going up against that Vegas second line, which can shut down anybody. That being said, you have Boston's power play 1, which is in a great spot against the Nashville team, who, as of press time, does not even have a coach right now. So there's that. And then, of course, you have, good old Nathan McKinnon going up against the New York Rangers, who are trotting out a new Russian goalie tonight, mind you. It just screams, just spend up. It's okay.
All right, same kind of thought process on the wing. Pasternak and Ovechkin are your only wings over 8K. So ducking just under that threshold at 7,800 is Patrick Kane versus Calgary, or Brad Marchand at 7,600. So do you like either of those guys as options tonight, Chris, or do you agree again you just got to pay up?
This is a case where, in one case, I would definitely pay up for Pasternak. However, Ovechkin is struggling a bit of late. This is a little bit of strange territory for him. He actually, in his last 3 games, has more missed shots than shots on net. Yeah, that's right. He's missed 11 shots and only has 7 shots on net in his last 3 games. Yes, he's in an excellent spot against Ottawa. I've heard it probably all night and all morning. But this is one case where I could sneak around on wing and maybe try for a Patrick Kane against Calgary, who is not all that stout defensively right now.
Jeff, where are you going on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with Chris here, too. I really like Patrick Kane in this spot. Calgary, it's not been a good defensive team most of the year, and I don't really see this as being a spot where they're just going to show up. I mean, Patrick Kane's been good, too, over his last little bit. Obviously, he had a pointless game his last time out, but the last couple games before that, the Chicago offense was clicking. I think at under 8K, 7,800, you're not getting a huge bargain here, but at the same time, you're saving money off of Ovechkin, who I'm not really ready to trust at over 8K right now. He has been struggling a little bit. And realistically, if you want to pay up for McKinnon and a stud winger like Kane, just saving even $300, $400, it's going to be a big thing. There's extreme values out there tonight that you can make this work. I would prefer Kane, though, for sure. I think Marchand and a Marchand and Bergeron stack is definitely in play, too. Chris mentioned the Nashville situation. That might be like a better GPP pivot. Those guys might actually go overlooked on a big slate, but I like Patrick Kane, all the players we talked about.
All right, on the blue line, Vancouver's Alexander Edler has double-digit fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games and is 5,500 at Tampa. Another option is Jacob Trouba. He has been hot, too, with 18-plus fantasy points in each of his last 2 games, so he's 5,300 tonight with the Rangers hosting Colorado. Jeff, who do you like?
I almost always would lean Edler in this spot. He's a pretty solid, just all-around contributor for fantasy purposes. Pretty solid on block shots. His production, too, over his last 10 games has come up a bit. And Tampa Bay, quite frankly, is one of those teams where, yes, they're a solid team, but they're sneakily bad defensively. It's not like the Vancouver power play is that potent, but Edler is out there all the time for them. He's definitely like a big part of their special teams. And like I said, he plays a lot, so the block shots are always in play for him as well. Trouba's kind of been pipped on the power play recently by Neil Pionk, so that worries me a little bit. Excuse me, he's not in the Jets anymore. I can't even remember the player who's D'Angelo, on the Rangers, who's been pipped by a little bit on the power play. So that worries me a little bit with Trouba. Obviously, he's still a good producer, but I definitely lean Edler in this spot against Tampa Bay.
All right, which way are you leaning, Chris?
Edler is always the steadier play. If he stays around DK average price, which is about 5,500 a player, I'm always going to pick the steady guy here. And look, this is a guy that averages well over 3 blocks a game. He's been 2/3 of an assist per game over the last 9. So 6 assists in the last 9 games. Able to generate a couple scoring chances even a game over his last 9. It's not great, but again, all you're going to need at this mid price point is a steady hand with all the guys that are at an elevated price. Edler would be your guy.
All right, 12-game slate, so you got some options. Who are you looking at in goal tonight, Chris?
This is where it gets a little fun. You can get overly cute, at least with some of the later games, and this is one that is intriguing at least. God, I hope this works. John Gibson, oddly enough, against a Columbus team who just played last night. Now, hear the reasoning out on this. Columbus is 10th in the league in shots on goal. They are 5th, however, in shots on goal since December 1st, despite having enough guys out to qualify for an entire MASH unit, which is something of a mind-blowing number. Here's the other one. The Columbus Blue Jackets are 3rd in the league in when it comes to back-to-back scenarios in shots on goal average. Now, if Gibson can keep it together just long enough, he is sub 8K, which is important here, at home. At home, that's usually pretty rare on DraftKings. They usually inflate numbers just a bit. He may be worth a shot tonight. And there's a couple other darts that you can take depending on where confirmations go. Obviously, Pittsburgh is an interesting pick if and only if Tristan Jarry is named the starter. There's also a little nugget in Washington to see if Ilya Samsonov is confirmed. It wasn't quite there at press time yet. And there are several options that I'm sure Jeff is just chomping at the bit to go over.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that the Anaheim call at all. I think that's a good one. John Gibson, obviously capable of big nights. Columbus did play last night. I think if you're looking for a little bit more safer plays, and I do feel like you don't have to get too crazy because there's some good values out there. I mean, going with Rask or Halak, whoever starts for Boston is completely fine in this spot for me. It's again, whenever those guys are under 8K, I mean, I think it's fine. Boston, I know they've been a little wonky over the last month or two, but I still think it's a good spot against Nashville, who has their own issues to deal with. And the spot I feel even more confident about is Vasilevsky or McElhinney, whoever starts for Tampa Bay. Vasilevsky's been really, really good over his last 4 or 5 starts. And again, under 8K, I mean, we're talking about Vancouver here, not exactly the most potent offense. Maybe it detracts a little bit from his save bonus potential, but Tampa Bay is a team who's not exactly great at stopping shots on goal either. So I think Vasilevsky under 8K is really good value to start.
All right, slate approved pick time. Who is your DFS lock on tonight's 12-game NHL slate? Jeff, start us off.
I'm going to go Patrick Kane. Again, I think under 8K, going up against the Flames, who I just think are a little bit of a fraud defensively this year. I think that's a really good spot. I think he's in for a good chance for a ceiling night.
Chris, slate approved, please.
Nathan McKinnon, he's angry. You could see it last night against the Islanders. There was at least 2 or 3 chances where he was just left scratching his head. That's not going to happen against the Rangers tonight.
All right, U2 football is next, right after the latest edition of Who'd I Miss On?
Wild Card Wemo, it's Who'd I Miss On with Adam Levitan. I'm Brendan Glasheen. This segment all about admitting failure. Levy tells us how 3 of his plays or non-plays burned him over the weekend. 4 games, Levy, means you had 8 teams to choose from. You did not play Derrick Henry, who scored the 2nd most DK points this weekend, 30.4 to be exact. It felt the Patriots defense was very content just letting him rack up yards.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think the Patriots saw what was coming. It was impossible not to. He was getting the ball on every play, but he was still getting 4, 5, 6 yards, even when they knew what was coming. And I mean, I think you've been profitable over the last 5, 6 years of not playing these kind of running backs who don't catch passes, who are very touchdown dependent as underdogs on the road in a spot like Foxborough. But Derrick Henry has proven to just be a different beast. And as I said, when you can gain 5 or 6 yards when the defense knows exactly what's coming, well, that's pretty special. So certainly some regret on not playing Derrick Henry, just in seeing him as an outlier rather than your standard kind of plotting between the tackles running back.
Yeah, real quick, do you think this kind of performance changes how you look at Derrick Henry for next year as far as a consistent back that you got to play?
Sure. I mean, it's all about how the game goes, because let's say the Patriots get up 21-0, which was certainly possible. Maybe not likely, but possible. Well, then Derrick Henry's in big, big trouble. And then you spent $8,400 on Derrick Henry. You got a big problem on your hands. So, I think a lot of it is just trying to figure out how the games are going to go.
Back opposite of Henry, Sony Michel of the Patriots, just 61 yards on 14 carries. What were your expectations for Michel going into this one exactly?
Yeah, so those were the expectations. I knew that Rex Burkhead would see a little bit. I knew that James White would see a little bit, but I expected Sony to have the bulk of the carries and maybe 1, 2, 3 targets. The key to Sony Michel is obviously scoring touchdowns. So for him to get stuffed at the 1-yard line twice was really the death blow. If he gets in there, then it looks like a really sharp play at 4,600. He doesn't get into the end zone. It looks really dumb.
Another stunner was Drew Brees. His poor performance, You played the Saints QB. Not just a pick in this game, but also a fumble. So how stunned were you by this rare carelessness of the football by Brees?
Yeah, I mean, this was the most shocking. I mean, they just didn't play well. For their offensive line, which was, I think, the best in the playoffs, for their offensive line to get overwhelmed by the Vikings defensive line, for them to make so many mistakes, Brees careless fumble and the interception, as you mentioned, and not be able to score touchdowns through the air. I mean, just the most shocking results. So everybody can have a bad day, and I think that's when you start to see it in one-game sample sizes of the NFL, where ownership can come into play. And, with everybody on Drew Brees in tournaments, at least, I think thinking about some other options may have made sense in hindsight.
Henry, Michel, Brees are who Adam Levitan missed on for Wild Card Weekend. Levy, we will see you next week. We'll find out who you missed on for the divisional round slate.
All right, sounds good.
All right, DraftKings contributors Reed Fowler and Jeff Ulrich are back, but not to talk about golf. It's for NFL Chalk Report. But before we get into NFL Chalk Report, we have reports coming out that Baylor coach Matt Rhule is finalizing a deal to become the next coach of the Carolina Panthers. So, yeah, I heard you read with the breaking news. So, what do you think of this pick, Reed?
Interesting. Look, he improved every single year from when he started at Baylor to finishing, I believe, 11-3, but still has a 19-20 record overall at Baylor. And now you're going to get a couple of Temple coaches previously, like Arians and now Matt Rhule, who are going to be coaching in this division. And I think when you're Carolina, it kind of what we were talking about yesterday with Mike McCarthy hire in Dallas is that Rhule's going to be this guy who, when you looked at that offense in Baylor, you just liked how they improved, especially in the backfield. When you have the best running back right now in the NFL, Christian McCaffrey, making sure that you're deploying him in the right spots, that's what you want. This Carolina team right now feels like they're all professionals, but I mean, you look at it's a young group. DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, whoever's going to be quarterback for the Carolina Panthers is going to be a young guy. And so now when you have that dynamic in the offense and in Carolina, you're going to want someone to bring new ideas, and that's what they need so far. Ron Rivera, who was there for such a long time, great coach, but you're going to need some new blood. I actually like this hire a lot.
Jeff, how do you feel about the hire?
I think it's a solid hire. I think I'm just going to talk about it mainly from a fantasy perspective. I'm not saying this is going to be a bad thing for Christian McCaffrey, but it's a change, right? Christian McCaffrey had the ceiling of all ceilings for usages for a running back last year and the year before. We're not sure if that's going to continue with Matt Rhule, right? So it is something to just watch, coach speak, just how, what they're doing in the preseason. Because any new situation, it could come with a change, and even just a slight change in usage could affect McCaffrey's cap on touches. I think it's a good thing for Samuel and DJ Moore potentially. I think both these guys a tad bit underused in the offense, and I think if they get the right QB in there, one of them could really explode for like a big year. So more bullish on it for the wide receivers, and it's not like I think this is a bad thing for McCaffrey. He's probably still going to be just fine, but it's a situation to just monitor. I think it's a good hire.
All right, guys, now let's get into Chalk Report. So who's going to be chalk at these positions for this weekend's Division Round Classic Contest? So chalk at quarterback. Reed, what do we think?
Yeah, there's many different ways you can go with roster construction. That's going to be the name of the game, obviously, with a very small slate. I got Patrick Mahomes in this spot at 7,500. If you look at what Kansas City has been able to do of recent, they've been fantastic, and especially at home. You like Patrick Mahomes, you like Andy Reid at home. At $7,500 going against a Houston team where we saw Buffalo in that first half really have their way against Houston. I really like Patrick Mahomes. Again, like I mentioned, there's a million different ways that you can go in terms of roster construction on this small slate. But when you have a guy who has a ceiling like Patrick Mahomes has, and it's not necessarily getting at the top in Lamar Jackson, I really like his price and his matchup this week against Houston.
All right, Jeff, who you going with? The chalk at QB.
I mean, I like the matchup for Mahomes too. I do think enough people are going to be scared away just from his recent, if you look at his game card, obviously he's failed to hit over 20 DK points in 2 of his last 4 games. I think enough people are going to be scared away by that and just go up to Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar Jackson will still end up being the chalky play at QB, even though he's 8,400. It's just, the numbers are just too hard to overlook. I mean, he consistently went off rushing-wise against every sort of type of team in the league this year. It didn't even really matter what the rush defense was, whether they were on the road, whatever. So I think people are just going to take that safe spot, look for value at other places, and there's decent value at places like running back that you can take advantage of. So I think that'll lead to Lamar Jackson being the chalky play. I will say this, I like targeting the 2 quarterbacks in the Green Bay-Seattle game. I think I think just maybe even both have the potential for big games there.
All right, speaking of running backs, who's going to be the chalk at running back, Jeff?
Yeah, I got to pull up my list here.
Yeah, take your time, man.
I mean, I think people kind of, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. It's the other way around.
Yeah, it's okay.
You get my point. People didn't play Dalvin Cook because they were worried about the matchup last week, and it completely burned them, right? So it's not going to happen 2 weeks in a row. The other thing leading to what I think what will be a chalky week for Dalvin Cook is that teams have run on San Francisco in the last part of the year. Again, this is a team that got involved in some shootouts, gave out some big games on the ground, and again, I think that people are going to say, okay, well, if he did it against the Saints, he's going to do it against San Francisco too. So I do think Dalvin Cook is going to garner quite a bit of ownership this week.
It sounds like we might have a child bursting into the room at any moment. We could only hope. Reed, who's going to be the chalky running back? I know, please.
I just want to delay this segment as long as possible, as long as
They're
possible.
just doing drive-bys. They're fine.
They're doing drive-bys. Oh, that's great. It's going to be Damian Williams for me, especially when you have a guy in a Kansas City backfield during the playoffs, and this is where we saw Damian come really into a lot of households, fantasy households, that is, in terms of what his ceiling was for the following year. Granted, he didn't do it, and he got hurt throughout the season. But if you look at Houston, this is really why I like Singletary last week, is that they give up a ton of production in the pass game in terms of to the running backs, 4th most in terms of, I believe, or top 5 in terms of receptions and yards given up. When you look at just the landscape, and Derrick Henry, probably going to be the one guy that a lot of people are going to try and cram in there, but potentially say it's too expensive and value elsewhere. Damian Williams at $6,000 allows you to do a lot of different things at wide receiver and tight end. So give me Damian at $6,000.
All right, what about wide receiver? Who is going to be chalky at wide receiver, Reed?
It's Deebo Samuel. And when you look at, again, roster construction and his price tag, I believe at $5,600 or near there, he's a guy that gets Xavier Rhodes and this Minnesota secondary, which, again, is dealing with a lot of injuries. And a guy like Xavier Rhodes, who just gives up a ton of production. I know when you look at Mike Thomas, you look at that Saints game, they just didn't do that well. And it was, more so game management and what have you. You can go a myriad of different ways on why that game didn't work for the Saints. But Xavier Rhodes, week in and week out, is giving up a ton of production. They're second now amongst the teams, or just in second right now in terms of ranking for fantasy production given up to opposing receivers. It's just a smash spot for a guy like Deebo Samuel, who is that big play guy. So give me him.
Jeff, the chalk at wide receiver.
Yeah, so I'm about to piss my producer off here. I wrote in Tyreek Hill. I meant to put in Devontae Adams at 7,800.
Ooh.
Devontae Adams, I mean, I can't even count how many targets he's had over his last 3 games. He's averaging 14.5 targets over his last 3 games. He's only $200 more expensive than Tyreek Hill. And then, look, the matchup for Hill is good. I think Tyreek Hill and Mahomes could be the perfect tournament pivot. But I think as far as chalk goes, you're talking about a Seattle secondary who, quite frankly, not really that good. I mean, just passing yards allowed. They were kind of a bottom half team. So again, not really a great pass rush. They're bottom 5 in terms of adjusted sack rate. I think they might have trouble getting some pressure on Aaron Rodgers in this game. Devontae Adams, again, the 7,800 is actually a bargain for a player getting targeted that much. So I think he's going to be the lead chalk at wide receiver.
All right, what about tight end, Jeff? Who's going to be chalky at the tight end? I hope you're not changing your answer again.
Jonnu Smith.
I'm not changing my answer for this one. I'm going with George Kittle. Again, Kittle is going to be, again, people might look at the matchup and say it's Minnesota. Look what they did last week. But there's not really any great value options to pivot off of here. And look, San Francisco has put up points, and quite frankly, Kittle was a beast to end the year. So 6,200 again. Travis Kelce, I think people might look at him as a consistent, maybe a decent tournament pivot. But Kittle here has got to be the guy. I mean, considering how Garoppolo and the San Francisco offense ended the year, there's still big favorites in this game as well. So he might not be like uber chalk. People might be able to talk their way off him enough, but I do think he's going to be probably the most popular target tight end this week.
All right, Reed, tight end, chalk, who?
Look, there's a lot of different places I think you can go at tight end. If you're not going to have a ton of confidence in the entire position because you haven't all season, I really like the Garoppolo and Kittle stack. If you want to go contrarian, if you look at that just in terms of that, no one's going to go against that Minnesota because they've been extremely tough for opposing tight ends, but George Kittle is essentially unguardable. But for me, it's going to be Mark Andrews. If I'm not attacking that game with Lamar Jackson, or if I'm not essentially going to Lamar Jackson in that game, I want to go to that tight end position. If you look at just Tennessee over the entire season, they're 5th most favorable to the opposing tight ends. He doesn't get a ton of targets. We've seen Hayden Hurst, and we've seen these guys kind of cycle through and be values. But when you talk about how this team really does well and how they operate in extreme and efficient ways, it's through their tight ends. They play a double tight end sets quite a bit. So give me him in terms of not necessarily going up top and trying to go elsewhere with the salary.
All right, there's got to be some chalk, defense, special teams. So, Reed, what do we think?
It's the Chiefs. It's the Chiefs. And when you look at what Buffalo was able to do to Houston, it's what they've been able to, it's just getting to that quarterback. I mean, Deshaun Watson was sacked I don't know how many times, and that one time he got out of the sack, which is what Buffalo needed to do to get him down, he evaded it and then obviously made that fantastic play. But this offensive line is garbage. Deshaun Watson is winning Houston games. He is the only guy on that team who is winning games. But when we look at Kansas City, they're getting healthier. They may get Dee Ford back this week. That's what I really like, and especially in that secondary. If the game flow goes like how we're thinking it's going to go, and Kansas City is going to be up by a lot, they're going to be passing a ton, look for Kansas City to really get after the quarterback.
Jeff, the chalk at DST.
I do think the top two picks are going to be the top priced two picks are going to be the chalkiest this week. I think people will take a shot on the Chiefs going up against Deshaun Watson, that shoddy O-line. But I think the Ravens are going to be probably the chalkiest pick. Again, people are just going to be looking at the game lines here and seeing them as home big favorites against Ryan Tannehill. And again, going up against Ryan Tannehill, going up against Deshaun Watson, I think most people are going to choose the team going up against Tannehill. And again, Baltimore has averaged almost 10 DK fantasy points per game. They've been a good fantasy defense for most of the year here. They're at home. Again, I just think the narrative with Baltimore being so good and kind of a step above the rest of the league, I think people will just try and pay up for the Ravens at DST.
All right, guys, great work. One more go-around with our NBA panel is coming up after we hear from the Pat Mayo experience on the Sony Open. So more golf.
Well, let's get into the quick picks for the Sony Open. For me, the guys I'm officially in on, all with each ways to the top 5, which means, if people are new, 1 bet for the outright win, and then 1 bet for 1/4 the odds on the top 5. Not every book has this, but a lot of books do. So, Corey Connors, 50-1. JT Poston, 55-1. Kevin Kisner, 55-1 for me. 2 of those numbers are gone. Connors is down to 40. Kisner's down to 50. I would still play both of them at those numbers. Poston is still 55. And I believe I have talked myself into Lonto Griffin. So the moment that we finish this, I'm going to go bet Lonto Griffin at 100-1 as well. The guys that I'm looking at, Neiman, Morikawa for sure, are the 2 that really pique my interest here. But I don't know if I want to go that high. I'm probably more likely to go Neiman because it's double the odds. Yourself.
Bets I have made: Neiman, Connors, Kisner. I agree. I got the 50, but I probably would have played Connors at this 40. I probably would have made that bet. Guys I'm looking at: Answer and Putnam. They didn't play this week. I'm gonna look.
Answer was, just remember, although Answer won us a lot of money at the President's Cup, he was an absolute luck sack with his putter. He made every putt all week until he played Tiger.
I think it's a very fair number.
And when you look at the influence of strokes gained at this tournament over the years, not to say that Answer can't do that. He's a fine player. But this is a tournament where your irons need to be better than your driving, historically. And Answer's driving is generally way superior to his irons.
Again, Neiman, Connors, Kisner, Answer, Poston, Putnam are three that those last three I haven't bet.
If I was going to go bomb shopping, because, I'm a sucker like that, the guys I would be looking at would be Harrington 275, Redmond 225, and Landry 300. I might throw like $5 each on them with the each way and just probably bet them top 20s. But again, my cheat sheet will be out on my Facebook page, facebook.com/thepme on Wednesday, and you can see if I have added these guys to the list or not. They'll definitely be on the first round leader card, Jeff.
Oh, I look forward to that.
I get screwed at this tournament in the first round every single year. The worst one was Chris Kirk is going to be like nice odds for first round leader because he either like comes inside the top 10 or misses the cut at this event. But I had him as first round leader 2 years ago, and I had Zach Johnson outright to win. And Kirk ran away with it. He was like 7 under in the morning. I was like, all right, let's cash like 125 to 1 to kick off the first full field event of the year. Then Zach Johnson storms him, finishes at -8, and then finishes at -8 for the tournament and loses by like 13 shots. Like, if you're going to cost me my first round leader and I have money on you, continue to play well. Like, come on, man. Come on, ZJ.
Can I get one more good minute out of you?
Let's do it.
Pretend the trend didn't exist for a minute, a moment. I'm going to actually steal 2 good minutes because we have information. Keegan, guys like that. Like, if the trend didn't exist and we weren't beholden to these guys like playing a week ago. Grillo
would have more
at
of my
70 to 1. If this trend didn't exist,
Grillo would have more of my. I feel like you should just not bet Grillo.
Then
you're doing a lot better with yourself.
You know what? I know the wormhole. Yeah.
Let's see. Keegan he missed the cut at Mayakoba, 24th of the WGC, 13th of the Zozo. You just have to pick the right Keegan week. I like him at harder places, to tell you the truth, than Birdie Fests.
DraftKings contributor Gary and Thorne and RotoWire's Nick Whalen are back to close the show with NBA high or low. So are these spreads too high or too low for tonight? So Detroit favored by 3.5 at Cleveland. Gary, too high or too low?
This seems a little high for the Pistons on the road. Look, Detroit, they held their own against the Lakers on Sunday. That was cool. They've shown flashes. They had a 30-point win last week as well. So I can see the logic here, and the Cavs are nothing special, obviously. But at the same time, across the last 10 games, Detroit has the second worst net rating in the entire NBA. They've only covered 5 of their 18 road games this season. It's just really hard to lay points with the Pistons, this version of the Pistons on the road. So I really can't separate these two teams all that much, so I'll take the home dog.
Nick, do you think being favored by 3.5 is a little high for the Pistons on the road?
It's certainly showing a lot of respect for a team that will not have Blake Griffin, will not have Markieff Morris, will not have Luke Kennard. I mean, those are 2 starters and one, basically a starter in Morris. And yet to still be favored by 3.5 against a Cavs team that's mostly healthy. Tristan Thompson is questionable for this game. He missed their last game with an illness, so you'd think he'd have a pretty good chance to be on the floor. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe Vegas is looking at this game and looking at kind of the dissension within the Cavaliers and, talking about Kevin Love, who's basically openly revolting against his own coach and potentially teammates on the floor. I mean, this is a really bottom of the barrel matchup, not just in terms of team records, but just, with Detroit not having so many of its key players. It's really, really tough to say, but I think Detroit probably wins the game, but 3.5 is probably a little bit too high of a line, I think.
All right, Portland at Toronto. Raptors favored by 1.5. Nick, too high or too low for you?
No Siakam, no Gasol, no Van Vliet tonight for Toronto, and yet they're still favored. I think that says, one, a lot about how much Vegas trusts Toronto and how well they've played despite all of these injuries. I know they're 3-4 over their last 7, which doesn't look great, but all those losses have come against really good teams. They've been hit with so many injuries this season that they were kind of due for those to hit during a tough point in the schedule. So you don't really hold that against Toronto. I think more than anything, this line, says a lot about this Portland team right now. I mean, they're a team that in terms of preseason expectations, I really whiffed on them. I thought they would be, close to as good as they've been the last 2 or 3 years where they've been, 45 plus wins fairly comfortably. And they just haven't had it. Damian Lillard's numbers look good. CJ McCollum's numbers look good, but It just hasn't necessarily translated to wins. And this is a team now that's, sunk into the bottom 10 in defense. They've lost 6 out of 7 of their own. It's just been really, really tough to trust Portland, especially against teams like Toronto that even when they're banged up, they don't seem to necessarily miss much of a beat.
Gary, what do you think? Too high? Maybe Toronto shouldn't be favored at all?
This one's really tough. I guess I'll side too high. It's really hard to trust a team, even as good a team as Toronto is and have proven to be, when they're missing 4 of their best 6 players and arguably 3 of their most important 4 players. Can Kyle Lowry play 45 minutes tonight? I don't know. He'd probably want to. And look, I pray at the Tao of Nick Nurse maybe more than anyone else, but at a certain point, it just seems like it's too much. And for as bad as the Blazers have been, they're 0-6 ATS, their past 6 games against teams above 500. And like Nick said, despite all these injuries, the 9 games they've played without Siakam and Gasol, Toronto still have the 7th best net rating in all of basketball. It's just so many injuries. So I do think the Blazers pull this one out.
All right, OKC favored by 2.5 at Brooklyn. Too high or too low for you, Garion?
I'm going to say this is too low for Oklahoma City. Look, they've just been really, really good. They've turned it on for about the past 3-4 weeks now. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. They've really been fantastic defensively, and that's an area where I just don't know how the Nets are going to score. I mean, Karis LeVert is going to come back and play in the second night of the back-to-back, and that should be big for Brooklyn. He was very good in the limited action he got against Toronto, but how much are his minutes going to increase? They're going to go from 16 to 20, because this team could really use him to play like 30 minutes. They have the worst offensive rating in basketball by a wide margin their last 6 games, all 6 being losses. They're scoring just 96 points per 100 possessions. In the modern NBA, that is atrocious. So I'm just going to take Oklahoma City, banking on their really good defense being able to shut down a bad offense.
Nick, you taking OKC here?
I am. I don't know that the line is necessarily too high. They are going all the way across the country on a road trip. But I echo pretty much everything that Garion said. I think the Karis LeVert return is maybe the swing piece for Brooklyn, but there's not much precedent for a guy, missing 2 months, playing 16 minutes in his first game back, and then, jumping back up to 35 minutes his next game. Chances are, like Garion said, he probably plays somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes at the absolute max. And for a team that, has been so bad on offense over these last couple of weeks, I don't know if that's enough to make a difference. I mean, the Thunder are basically exactly league average in both offense and defense, and that doesn't sound great, but you'll take it at least, especially when you look at the Nets, like Garion said, who've been, bottom of the league over their last 6 games. That's dragged them all the way down to 24th in offensive rating over the course of the entire season. They failed to break 90 points twice during their last 6 games. This is an OKC team that's been particularly stingy on the defensive end, especially early in the year. To me right now, OKC, whether they're playing at home or on the road, they just look like the more reliable team, and pretty surprisingly, a team that's now solidified themselves as pretty much the bona fide 7th best team in the Western Conference.
All right, Minnesota at Memphis. Memphis favored by 3. Too high or too low for you, Nick?
This is a really, really tough one, partially because of the injuries for Minnesota. Cat is once again questionable, but based on how that's gone the last 7 or 8 times, you would think maybe he's out again. Minnesota, though, is coming off back-to-back wins. They've been able to string a couple of decent games together. However, those wins came against Golden State and Cleveland, 2 of the 3 or 4 worst teams in the NBA. And I know record-wise, maybe Memphis is a little bit closer to some of those teams, but I mean, they've won 2 in a row. They put up 140 on the Clippers, the banged-up Clippers, that is, the other day, but still a pretty impressive offensive performance. I think I'll just lean Memphis at home. This is one that if it was played in Minnesota, maybe I'd go the other way.
Where are you going, Garion?
Yeah, I'm going to lean Memphis too. Look, these are 2 Jekyll and Hyde teams, specifically Memphis. You don't really know what version of this team is going to show up on any given night, but we were just singing Oklahoma City's praises. One of their 2 losses in their last 10 games came to Memphis. Memphis has beaten Miami. They've beaten the Clippers, where sure, Minnesota's won 4 of their last 7 games, but there was an overtime win against Brooklyn, who we were just degrading, Golden State, Cleveland, and even in that Cleveland game, they gave up a 30-1 run in the 4th quarter. So I just can't trust them. I'll take Memphis.
All right, guys, good stuff. That is a show. The Sweat will be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We'll see you then.